Imagine finding an entire civilization that simply vanished. No war, no mass grave, no burned villages, just empty farms, empty churches, and silence. That is exactly what happened on the coast of Greenland almost 600 years ago. And to this day, nobody knows for certain what really happened to the people who lived there. This is the story of the Norse Greenlanders, a Viking society that survived in one of the harshest places on Earth for nearly 500 years, and then disappeared so completely that when later explorers returned, all they found were ruins, bones, that still haunts historians today. Our story begins in Iceland in the 10th century, with a man whose temper was as fiery as his hair. His name was Erik Thorvaldsson, but almost everyone remembers him by a different name, Erik the Red. Erik was born around the year 950 in Norway, but his family did not stay there for long. His father was exiled from Norway after killing a man, and the family fled west to Iceland to start a new life. But violence seemed to follow this family wherever they went. As Erik grew older, he became a farmer and a settler in Iceland, but he inherited his father's temper. In one dispute, Erik got into a fight over some ornamental wooden pillars that his family had brought with them from Norway. These pillars held deep personal and religious value. When a neighbor refused to return them, Erik took matters into his own hands and stole them back. This escalated into a violent feud, and in the fighting that followed, Erik killed several men, including the sons of the man he had quarreled with. As punishment, Erik was banished from that part of Iceland. He moved to another region, hoping to start over, but trouble found him again. Another dispute broke out, more blood was spilled, and Erik was formally sentenced to 3 years of exile from Iceland altogether. For a Viking with nowhere left to go in his homeland, this could have been the end of his story. Instead, it became the beginning of something far bigger. Rather than accept defeat, Erik decided to sail west into unknown waters, searching for land that other sailors had only glimpsed from a distance. Icelandic sailors had spoken of a landmass far to the west, spotted briefly during storms but never explored. Erik set out to find it, and around the year 982, he succeeded. What he discovered was a rugged, ice-covered island, but along its southwestern coast, he found fjords with green valleys, grass and land that seemed surprisingly fertile compared to the frozen wasteland he expected. Erik spent his 3 years of exile exploring this new land, mapping its coastline and scouting the best places to build a settlement. When his exile ended, he returned to Iceland with an ambitious plan. He needed people willing to leave everything behind and start a new colony in this distant, unknown territory. To convince them, Erik gave the land a name designed to attract settlers rather than scare them away. He called it Greenland. It was, in many ways, one of history's earliest examples of clever marketing. The island was covered in massive ice sheets, glaciers, and freezing winds, but Erik focused only on the patches of green coastline he had found, and the name stuck. Whether it was pure salesmanship or genuine optimism, it worked. In the year 985, Erik organized a large expedition, gathering 25 ships loaded with settlers, livestock, tools, and supplies, all willing to risk everything for a new beginning across dangerous seas. The journey west was brutal. Of the 25 ships that set out, only about 14 made it safely to Greenland. The rest were lost to storms, turned back in fear, or wrecked along the way. This alone tells us how dangerous this migration truly was. These were not soldiers or explorers with military backing. These were farmers, families, and laborers, crossing open ocean in wooden ships, chasing the promise of land in a place most people had never even heard of. Those who survived the crossing established two main settlements along the southwestern coast of Greenland. The larger one became known as the Eastern Settlement, and the smaller one, located further north along the coast, became known as the Western Settlement. Despite their names, both were actually located on the western side of Greenland, but the naming reflected their position relative to each other, not to the island as a whole. Erik himself settled at a place called Brattahlid, where he built his farm and became the leader of this new colony. Archaeological remains of his settlement can still be found there today. Under Erik's leadership, the population steadily. Estimates suggest that at its peak, the Norse Greenland colony was home to somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 people, spread across hundreds of farms. But here is the part almost nobody expects. This tiny Arctic colony was about to become far more connected to the outside world than anyone could have imagined. These settlers brought their Norse way of life with them. They raised cattle, sheep, and goats. They built long houses similar to those found in Iceland and Norway. They practiced Norse customs, spoke the Norse language, and eventually adopted Christianity, just as their homeland did. Within a few generations, the Greenland settlement even had its own church structure, complete with a cathedral and its own bishop, an extraordinary achievement for such a remote outpost of the medieval world. One of the most impressive surviving structures from this era is Ifalsi Church, believed to have been built around the year 1300. Its stone walls still stand today, remarkably intact after more than 7 centuries. This church becomes especially important later in our story because it is connected to the very last written record we have of the Norse Greenlanders. But life in Greenland was never easy. The land Erik had so cleverly named Greenland was still an unforgiving Arctic environment. Summers were short, growing seasons were limited, and the soil was thin and difficult to farm. The settlers had to rely on a mixture of livestock farming, hunting, and fishing to survive. They hunted seals, caribou, and seabirds, and they also hunted walrus, which turned out to be far more valuable than anyone initially expected. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Walrus ivory became one of the most important economic resources for the Norse Greenlanders. In medieval Europe, ivory was a prized material, used for religious items, jewelry, and decorative carvings. Since African and Asian elephant ivory was difficult and expensive to obtain in medieval Europe, walrus tusks from Greenland became a valuable substitute. For a time, this trade connected the remote Arctic colony to churches, nobles, and markets across Europe, giving the settlers a reason and a means to maintain contact with the outside world. This trade network was essential because Greenland could not produce everything its people needed. Timber, iron, and many essential goods had to be imported from Norway and Iceland, since Greenland itself had very few trees and limited natural resources for tool making. In exchange, the Norse Greenlanders exported walrus ivory, walrus hide ropes, furs, and even live polar bears, which were prized as exotic gifts for European royalty. For centuries, this exchange kept the isolated colony connected to the wider Norse and European world. But trade was not the only thing pulling these Greenlanders toward the horizon. The settlers also expanded their exploration further west and south, eventually reaching the coast of North America centuries before Christopher Columbus. This is where Erik's own son enters the story. Leif Erikson, following in his father's adventurous footsteps, led an expedition that reached a new land which the Norse called Vinland. believed by most historians today to be somewhere along the coast of what is now Newfoundland in Canada. This makes the Norse Greenlanders and their descendants some of the very first Europeans to set foot on North American soil, nearly 5 centuries before Columbus's voyage. However, even as their world expanded, tragedy was never far away. Around the year 1000, a new wave of settlers arrived in Greenland from Norway, bringing much-needed supplies and reinforcements. But they also brought something far more dangerous: disease. An epidemic swept through the young colony, and among its victims was Erik the Red himself, the very founder of Greenland's Norse settlement. He died around the year 1003, leaving behind a colony that would continue to grow and survive for centuries after his passing, carried forward by his children and the community he had built. For the next several hundred years, life in Norse Greenland continued in a rhythm familiar to medieval Scandinavian society. Farms operated season after season, churches held services, trade ships arrived when conditions allowed, marriages were celebrated, children were born, and the community adapted as best it could to its harsh surroundings. Around the 1260s, the Greenland colony formally recognized the King of Norway as its overlord, tying its political fate even more closely to the fortunes of the Norwegian crown. But something was coming that no sword, no wall, and no amount of courage could stop. Slowly, almost invisibly at first, conditions began to change. Climate researchers studying ice cores and sediment layers have discovered something important. During the time Erik the Red first settled Greenland, the climate in the region was relatively mild. It may have even been slightly warmer than today's climate in that area. This warmth is part of what made the initial settlement possible at all. However, starting sometime in the 13th and 14th centuries, global temperatures began to drop as the world entered a period now known as the Little Ice Age. For the Norse Greenlanders, this shift in climate was devastating. Growing seasons that were already short became even shorter. Grazing land for livestock shrank. Sea ice increased, making the ocean routes between Greenland, Iceland, and Norway more dangerous and unpredictable. Ships that once made regular trips became less frequent, and eventually, the voyage that connected Greenland to the rest of Europe became rare, then almost non-existent. At the same time, economic conditions in Europe were shifting in ways that hurt Greenland's trade value. Demand for walrus ivory began to decline, partly because new trade routes to Africa and Asia opened up better access to elephant ivory, which was considered superior in quality. This meant the one major export that had justified risky voyages to Greenland was suddenly worth far less, giving merchants less incentive to make the dangerous journey at all. Cultural rigidity may have compounded these problems. Historians and archaeologists have noted that the Norse settlers largely maintained their traditional European farming methods, even as conditions grew less favorable for that lifestyle. Compare that to the indigenous Arctic peoples nearby. They had developed highly specialized hunting and survival techniques suited perfectly to the Arctic environment. The Norse settlers, by contrast, were slower to adapt to a hunting-based lifestyle. They stayed committed to livestock farming, even as it became less and less sustainable. Speaking of indigenous peoples, the Norse were not alone on the island. Archaeological and historical evidence suggests that the Norse Greenlanders had intermittent contact with Arctic indigenous groups, first the Dorset people, and later the Thule people, the ancestors of today's Inuit populations. Some evidence suggests limited cultural exchange, such as the Norse adopting certain indigenous boat-building techniques or hunting tool designs. However, most historical accounts suggest that relations between the two groups were often distant, occasionally tense, and never resulted in the kind of deep cultural that might have helped the Norse adapt more successfully to the Arctic environment over time. As the 14th century gave way to the 15th, signs of serious decline became harder to ignore. The Western settlement, the smaller of the two Norse colonies, appears to have been abandoned first, sometime in the mid-1800s. Later Norse writings describe an expedition sent to check on the Western settlement, only to find it completely empty, with no clear explanation for what had happened to its inhabitants. Livestock wandered untended, homes stood empty, and there was no sign of violence or catastrophe, only absence. The larger eastern settlement held on considerably longer, but it too was clearly struggling. Contact with Europe became increasingly rare. Bishops assigned to oversee the Greenland Church often never made the journey at all, choosing instead to serve in name only from the comfort of Europe. Supply ships that once arrived reliably became sporadic, then almost non-existent, cutting off the settlers from the iron tools, timber, and other essential goods they depended on to survive. The very last historical record we have of the Norse Greenlanders comes from a group of Icelandic sailors who visited the eastern settlement between the years 1406 and 1410. Their accounts, preserved in later writings, describe a community that still seemed, on the surface, remarkably normal. In one entry, they mention a Greenlander named Kolgrim, who was executed for allegedly using witchcraft to seduce a married woman, a story that reveals a society still functioning with its own laws, customs, and social order intact. In a far more touching final record, the Icelandic visitors describe attending a wedding at Ifalsi Church, the very stone church whose ruins still stand along Greenland's coast today. The wedding, held in the year 1408, appears to have been conducted with all the proper religious customs, complete with priests overseeing the ceremony. The sailors eventually departed and made their way back home to Iceland by 1410. And with that, the historical record simply stops. No warning of crisis, no mention, starvation, or conflict. Just a wedding, a farewell, and then centuries of silence. For nearly 100 years afterward, no European ships are recorded as having visited the Greenland settlements at all. When explorers and traders eventually returned to the region in the following century, they found no living Norse community whatsoever. Instead, they found abandoned farms, crumbling stone churches, and scattered human remains, evidence of a once thriving society that had simply ceased to exist, without anyone in the wider world witnessing exactly how or when it happened. This mystery has fascinated historians and archaeologists for centuries. So what actually killed Greenland? There is still no single, universally agreed upon answer. Instead, most researchers today, the disappearance was caused by a combination of overlapping pressures, arriving together like a perfect storm, rather than any single dramatic event. The most significant factor was almost certainly the changing climate. As the Little Ice Age intensified, growing seasons became short and unpredictable to reliably sustain the livestock farming lifestyle the Norse depended on. Hay, which was essential for feeding animals through the brutal winters, became harder to produce in sufficient quantities. Livestock died from starvation and cold. Some archaeological excavations of Norse farms from this later period have even revealed evidence suggesting desperate final years, with signs that some communities may have resorted to eating farm animals not normally used for food, including even household pets, as conditions grew dire. Combined with this was the economic isolation. As walrus ivory lost its value in European markets, and as sea ice made voyages increasingly dangerous, contact with Norway and Iceland dwindled dramatically. Without regular trade ships, the Greenlanders could not import the iron tools and timber essential for maintaining their farms, homes, and boats. Over time, without these essential resources, daily survival would have become progressively more difficult. There is also evidence pointing towards soil exhaustion and environmental degradation caused by the Norse farming methods themselves. Studies of soil samples from the region suggest that centuries of livestock grazing may have gradually stripped away fragile Arctic topsoil, making the land less and less capable of supporting the kind of farming the settlers depended on. In an environment already struggling under a cooling climate, this kind of environmental strain could have accelerated the colony's decline even further. Some researchers have also proposed that as conditions worsened, many Greenlanders may have simply chosen to leave rather than stay and face a dying colony. Rather than a dramatic catastrophe, this theory suggests a slow, gradual exodus, families and individuals leaving on whatever ships remained available, resettling in Iceland, Norway, or elsewhere in Europe, until eventually there were too few people left to sustain a functioning society at all. Other theories have suggested the possibility of conflict with indigenous Arctic peoples, pirate raids from European ships seeking easy plunder, or the psychological toll of extreme isolation contributing to the colony's collapse. However, most modern archaeological evidence does not strongly support large-scale violence as the primary cause. There are no mass graves, no widespread burn layers, no clear signs of a violent, sudden ending. Instead, everything points toward a slow, grinding decline spread across generations rather than a single dramatic event. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of this story is the very silence surrounding its ending. Unlike many historical collapses, where we have detailed accounts of famine, war, or plague, the end of Norse Greenland comes with almost no direct explanation at all. The Icelandic sailors who visited in 1410 described nothing unusual, nothing alarming, just ordinary community life, weddings, disputes, and daily routines. And yet, within just a few generations after that final visit, the entire society had vanished, leaving behind only ruins for future explorers to discover centuries later. What makes this story so powerful and so relevant even today is what it reveals about the fragile relationship between human societies and their environment. The Norse Greenlanders were skilled sailors, capable farmers, and resourceful survivors who managed to build a functioning medieval society in one of the most hostile environments imaginable. For nearly 5 centuries, they endured Arctic winters, isolation, and constant hardship, adapting as best they could using the knowledge and traditions they carried with them from their Scandinavian homeland. But ultimately, when the climate shifted dramatically, when trade routes vanished, and when the economic value of their main export collapsed, even their remarkable resilience was not enough to save them. Their story stands today as one of history's most compelling examples of how climate change, economic isolation, and cultural rigidity can combine to bring an entire civilization to its knees, not through war or invasion, but through the slow, quiet erosion of the very foundations that allowed it to survive in the first place. Today, the ruins of Norse Greenland remain scattered across the southwestern coast of the island, silent witnesses to this incredible chapter of human history. Visitors can still walk among the stone remains of Brattahlid, where Erik the Red once built his farm. They can still stand inside the roofless walls of Avaldsey Church, the very site of that final recorded wedding in 1408, and imagine the community that once gathered there, unaware that they were living through the final years of their civilization's story in this remote Arctic frontier. The disappearance of the Norse Greenlanders, that even the most determined human societies remain deeply connected to and dependent upon the natural world around them. Ancestral generations across history, whether in the icy fjords of Greenland, the deserts of the ancient world, or the mountains of distant continents, all faced this same fundamental truth. Survival was never guaranteed. It had to be earned, adapted, and constantly renegotiated with an environment that could shift beneath their feet at any moment, sometimes gradually, and sometimes with consequences that would take centuries for the rest of the world to even notice. And so, the Norse Greenlanders remain both a triumph and a warning. A triumph, because for nearly 500 years, they proved that human ingenuity and determination could carve out a life in one of the harshest corners of our planet. And a warning, because their eventual disappearance shows us that no society, no matter how resilient, is ever truly safe from the slow, silent pressures of a changing world. Their farms are empty now, their church stands roofless under the Arctic sky, and their story continues to whisper an ancient lesson to anyone willing to listen. Adapt, or eventually, the land itself will decide your fate.